to the dent.
I always start with the tabletop, you guys know that. And as I get ready to put this on, yeah, of course I'm going to put the sweater on, you guys. Come on. This is the big tamale. You can hear the metal clanking, the authentic brass clanking. There's no sound like it, and I was really just thrilled for weeks, even as I was picking this stuff up. Thinking about putting it on here for the first time as the real material. It would have the real weight, the real, nuances and whatnot. But I wanted to open this for a specific reason. You've seen this in the mirror, obviously, and you've seen me wear this glove a million times, or gloves like it a million times. But we're going to focus, as we start this little documentary, on one of the two problems, and we're going to also address a second, with my gloves in particular, and gloves across the board out there in the blogosphere and the hemisphere and the nightmare sphere. Scale. I'm showing myself in the mirror for a very specific reason. You see me doing a lot of POV stuff, a lot of point of view stuff, a lot of stuff in camera, specifically focusing on the glove, and every now and then you'll see me peeking in. And yeah, of course, more of me, as my dad used to say. But that's not really it. It's not a narcissistic thing. It's often to give the viewer the sense of what I'm trying to convey, which is the embodiment of the visage of this glove. And this glove is just not the glove. The glove is attached to somebody who wears it, and we all know that. Now, obviously, I'm much larger than Robert, and my hand is as well. And I can't really wear this as much as it looks like I can. I've got it strapped with little black rubber bands, and I've got the back plate actually bolted now to the leather, not authentically, and we'll talk about that as well. It's actually kind of a strange little rig that we're going to be discussing, but for intents and purposes, I've got the two bolts attached, and I've got it rubber banded to my fingers with these rubber bands I got, so I could get some mobility. But I always want to show the scale because it looks huge in the original film. When it's on the hand, when it's in camera like this, it looks huge on my hand. And when it's, we're going to be focusing, we're going to do a callback on this scene in just a second, because we're going to be pointing out one of the major inconsistencies with both my gloves and a lot of the gloves out there, and a lot of the choices that I had to address to bring this to fruition, this true hero. So I show myself because I always want to demonstrate the scale of this thing, which is to scale. Depending on the lens that you use, depending on the lens that the filmmakers used, It'll push things, it'll squish things, it will make things look more pronounced, perspective will be thrown. It is a huge, if not the largest problem other than basic craftsmanship that any glove builder will ever face. And it is why I dress up in the sweater. Well, no, I dress up in the sweater because I wanted the red on the sleeve. That's all visual. But it's why I pose with this thing. It's why I'm doing the school bus pose right now and trying to get the silhouette from Revenge. It's why I'm trying to mirror the movements. It's why I am going to the lengths that I am in order to bring this into reality from the screen. And that's exactly what we're doing. So again, keeping in mind it's always to be within the 90 to 95 percentile of accuracy because, again, I don't have the physical prop in front of me, and even were I to have it in front of me, it would still only be within that percentile. Because unless you break that original prop down, hammer those templates out, get them off of it, rebend it with the prop already formed again as your guide, you're never going to get it. So I'm happy with my percentile. But let's start talking about, now that we've covered scale and the fact that this thing can really throw you off depending on how you're looking at it. And I've demonstrated by putting it up to my face that it's pretty much, you know, it's a match. I mean, the measurements are a dead-on match. They're the original measurements. I'm not concerned about that, but I wanted to touch base on it because it was important. Let's talk about the other inconsistency. This glove has been around for 3 decades. Well, not this glove. The glove I based it off of, the Hero glove, the Mike Becker glove. And it's gone through a lot of changes. It's been dinged, it's been tweaked. We all know the backplate stories. The backplate looks nothing like it did in the original, which is, it's almost like a 1950s car versus a 1990s car. That's how I kind of equate it visually. And so now let's get off the backplate. Let's start talking about one of the other major differences, which is the middle tip. Yep. It looks strikingly different between all 3 films actually. The original, Revenge, and how it looks today. And what I'm going to be showing you here is a visual demonstration of that difference. And here we're just doing a bit more scale work and also movement. We'll talk about this also in a little while. I'll probably revisit that. Again, showing you a little bit more scale. Before we get into this, if you look at how large, this is the Jesse Hero scene. It's made from the same templates I made this UE edition glove. Look at how different the scale is, specifically with the different camera lens and the glove more in the foreground. It just blows, it even blows my mind. So I always go back to making sure the scale is shown as close to being in the room with me as I can, to let you guys know, to let my psyche know that I got it right. Thank you, OCD poster boy. Let's get back to the main difference. The middle. Looks pretty fab, right? Of course, looks great. It looks like it does today, pretty much. And I was still working on it when I did this, but take a look at this right here. The right side of the middle finger, of the middle tip specifically, has changed drastically. It's changed so drastically that I have had to go to unbelievable lengths just to make sure, in my own mind, I know what version I want. It's to that extreme. And none of the other fingers seem, from my better judgment, to fall prey to this problem. So for whatever reason, that middle finger, that middle tip was really just completely tweaked around and jammed out and then pulled back out. And it's a detail that makes or breaks the glove between Revenge and now. So in order to get that, I needed to go back into my psyche and say, okay, look, we're going to do this finger, we're going to do it right. And if I really want the build sequence hero, which this screenshot comes from, I need to match that, even though my psyche doesn't want me to. My psyche wants me to match it as it looks today because that's the glove we're all familiar with and we've seen pictures of and we know for sure that's it. Well, guess what? So is this. So I have to go in with my mind's eye and deconstruct how it physically looks today in my psyche and go back in time and say, nope, this is how it looks back then. So between the two, you can see, is a pretty big difference. In fact, it's a complete difference. So the task at hand is to do what I can with what I have to go back in time and recreate what doesn't exist anymore, using what exists in the present as my guide to what the glove is capable of, the limits it can be pushed, and backtrack. And how do we do that? Well, thank goodness I have a lot of reference, and I'll make no bones about it. I'm a lucky person to have it. And obviously we are looking now at one of my cohorts. Mark Petrie happens to be wearing the Hero in this shot. Thank you, Mark. A lot of his pictures are out there. I have been lucky enough for him to be as generous as he has with his reference, whether he meant to put it up or not. As reference, I don't know, but there it is, wearing the original Hero, as owned by Mike Becker. And when compared to how the glove looked back in the day, in 1984, you can see we have some pretty serious work to do. So I began the process by, taking my version of how the glove looks today, which is what I call the Becker clone. You're all familiar with this by now, which is a pretty much dead-on match, although I've said this many times, there are inaccuracies on the Becker clone because it was my final revision on my templates before I did the UE edition, which is the Ultimate edition, which is within about 98% in terms of accuracy. So I'm comfortable with it. I'm comfortable with it being my gauge. Haha, no pun intended. Now I know what you're saying. It all seems perfectly logical. Well, no. Actually, it's a lot more complicated than that. You see, this is just the beginning. These digits all have their own idiosyncrasies. They all have their moods, they all have their details. They also all have the signature flaws inherent in a constant kit bash. This glove has changed so dramatically over the years that in order to put it back the way it was, you're deciding upon countless hours during production, pre-production. We've all seen the picture of Lou Carlucci wearing it just off the shop floor, just off the assembly line. None of the bends, none of all this bend detail, the buckling, the torquing, none of it was present. None of the fulcrum angles on the backplate. It was streamlined. He had to go in there and create all those things for some mobility and also for design whimsy, to create the look of it being somewhat crude, as he liked to say, or as he did say in the NSA documentary. Thank you, Luke. So for somebody with OCD, and many of us have that, it really is mind-numbing. So I've locked it down to me, myself, my personal preferences. You all know what I'm up for. I like two things. I like the build sequence, and I like the pipe scrape. But even here, the glove has changed. Remember, the build sequence opener was shot at the very end, the last thing shot in the entire production. So the glove had already had its blades blunted off. It had already had the ringlets attached by that point. All the stuff, all the telltale stuff, the soldered blade, all of it, that was all present. So when we're seeing it, and I've said this many times, when we're seeing the glove in that reveal, it's not the reveal. It had been through the entire production already. So we compare that now to the pipe scrape. Why do I like the pipe scrape? I like the pipe scrape because the colors are the most vibrant you see at any point in production. Now, even the armature itself changed during production. If you look at the pillow scene with the slashing of the feathers, it's been completely blacked out on the stalls. It just goes on and on and on. The sheen is much more diffused. It's matted out because of those blacks. There's a really great still on it. If you compare that then to the pipe scrape, there's an incredible sheen on the metal as if it had never been sanded. But it's got all that black discoloration and darkness, and it's almost this rich coppery, brown. And yes, it's shot in shadow, but this thing refracts pretty honestly depending on your setup. And you compare that then to the opening build sequence where the armature, even though it's in low light, and you can see a lot of it's up here on my board, you can tell that it's very little weathering. It's very little detail. It's very little things to hide under the muck of this beautiful thing. All the tip work is still there. And even through that low light, you can see all the authentic reds that were created by the brazing and the patterns that naturally occurred. This is all stuff you have to take into account beyond just the armature shading. So the armature is just as different, especially between those 3 points.
So which point do we choose? If I were to go to the pipe scrape, I could tell you the ringlets hadn't been attached. Obviously, we all know about the rubber bands. The ringlets hadn't been attached at that point. And the shaping of the fingers are so clumsy and so fat and so, tapered to the front. The glove was in utero. It was mid-production itself. It had not been finalized at that point. All this stuff back here was almost completely straight at certain angles. It didn't fit right. It sat clumsy. The back plate was completely off the glove. I could go on and on. By the time we get to the build sequence, which again is at the end of production, all that had changed. So Lou had gone in and made these torques and these pulls and these things to accommodate the ringlets better and the mobility. He was still constantly working on this thing, much as we glove builders do. This is what I take into account. So if I'm going to say my Hero glove matches the pipe scrape, well, yeah, it will in certain degrees, but we have to take into account it's gone well beyond just being screen accurate. I've said this now, it's also scene accurate.
So I have to go in with my mind's eye and deconstruct how it physically looks today in my psyche and go back in time and say, nope, this is how it looks back then. And there it is. This is how the glove looked in 1984 as far as the middle tip is concerned. I did with the magic tool, which I do most of this stuff with the magic tool. And this is a real bitch. It's a real bitch on a number of reasons. Lighting, obviously, I always talk about being indicative of the problems constructing these things and reproducing them from 2D and 3D objects. The curve on the right-hand side really does create the illusion of roundness where it does have that tapered point. And again, it's got to match every single view, every single picture, at every single angle, wherever possible, within 95 to 98%. I go as low as 90, but really I don't, because you guys know I'm OCD. So, I'm finally happy with it. Here is the middle tip. I'm going to be talking more about this as we go along. We're going to be discussing not every single aspect. I mean, I could be talking right now about the fact that the notch in the front isn't quite sitting right because the blade is epoxied on and it's not the final blade, it's just the temp master. So I still have to affix the blade. There's still a bit of work to do, but all in all, it's great. Perfectly how I saw it in my mind's eye, and it matches every shot, shot for shot, angle for angle. So, to that effect, like I said, we're going to be talking about other things as we go through this. Certainly the back plates. I'm going to do an entire section on the back plates, 1 through 3, and that's not parts 1 through 3. That is 3 eras, 84, Revenge, and how it looks today, because it is different. And so is this middle. I'm going to be readdressing this middle later on in this video. For the guys watching, anybody interested, special thanks to everybody involved, obviously. And I know I promised I would show you guys, at least one of the tricks, at least in a segment, at least maybe one a segment. We'll see. But I think I'm going to blow more of the doors off as this thing goes on. But I really wanted to focus on the middle because it is inexorably the one that trumps all of us at some point. And again, this is the prototype. Are there a millimeter here, a millimeter there inconsistency, and literally at the millimeter level? Yeah, perhaps. Not really though. I really didn't miss a trick. I went in at the micro level. I went in at the millimeter level with this. Other tools you've seen on the desk I haven't talked about. To do what I have done here to make sure it matches not just the glove, but the glove armature, how it looked in 84.